It's been called the greatest threat to the planet, but climate change in the US is a deeply political issue. When the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention quietly and without explanation cancelled a conference on climate health, it left many in the scientific community disappointed. But former Vice President Al Gore helped organise a new summit, reflecting a determination to address issues he and many others see as crucial.
I just want to note that we do have the solutions at hand. It is hard to focus on some of these horrific consequences of the climate crisis on health, but hope is justified.
One of the more immediate challenges for environmentalists is the Trump administration's appointments of key figures like Scott Pruitt.
I'm asking your personal opinion.
My personal opinion is immaterial.
The former Attorney General of Oklahoma is likely to head up the Environmental Protection Agency, but remains skeptical that human activity causes climate change. Despite the challenges, though, many remain optimistic that globally climate change is and will be tackled.
Worldwide, governments are taking this issue seriously, so we will get on top of this. We will tackle it. The market and popular culture are moving in this direction. Government will catch up.
Over the next 4 years, environmental groups in the US face some serious challenges. Government budgets may be cut, policies drastically change, but there is a renewed sense that activists will continue to talk about, plan and tackle climate change.
Well, indeed, the UN has warned that parts of Africa are facing the worst drought in 60 years. By some accounts, more than 30 million people are at risk. CGTN's Robert Nagila has more.
In the Horn of Africa, 8 agencies say a severe drought affecting Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, Uganda and Djibouti has left over 12 million people in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. In South Sudan, the impact's been intensified by more than 3 years of conflict. The World Food Programme says more than 5 million people need help. Some areas already are thought to be suffering famine. And to the south, Lesotho, Malawi, Namibia, Swaziland, South Africa and Zimbabwe have all declared emergencies due to the drought. Now, Mozambique has declared a red alert in some areas.
In Mozambique, a tropical cyclone that hit the eastern coast on Wednesday has killed 7 people, raising the death toll from 4 people earlier this week. The storm has brought heavy rains and winds of up to 160 kilometers an hour, raising the risk of flooding and crop damage in the southern African country. According to a statement released by Mozambique's Emergency Operational Center, about 130,000 people living in the Inhambane province, which is 500 kilometers north of the capital Maputo, had been affected by this storm. Damage could be inflicted on Mozambique's multi-million-dollar macadamia nut industry. Subsistence maize farmers recovering from last year's El Niño-triggered drought are also at risk.
Initial reports show that 4 people have lost their lives, 3 of whom were fatally hit by broken coconut trees. At this moment, there are approximately 14 injured people, none of them in serious condition. From what we can see, almost all infrastructure, including government buildings, have been damaged. Almost all buildings are partially or completely without roofs. And the schools have also partially or totally lost their roofs, and their windows were blown away. Electricity posts have been knocked down, trees have fallen, but these are preliminary evaluations.
Good evening, I'm DeMarco Morgan. There's rain in the southeast tonight, but nothing like the deadly storms that blasted the Pacific coast in the past 24 hours. Parts of Southern California were hit with record rainfall and winds gusting at hurricane force. At least 2 people are dead as the severe weather pushes across the desert Southwest. Another wave of storms is expected to roll into the west late Sunday. Here's Carter Evans.
Wind gusts up to 80 miles per hour blew down hundreds of trees and power lines, leaving more than 100,000 people in the dark. The storm also caused the cancellation of hundreds of flights.
A very dangerous situation.
And a 20-foot wide sinkhole opened in this LA street, swallowing a car into the rushing water below. Firefighters were able to rescue the driver just before.
There goes the car.
The sinkhole claimed another vehicle. Crews have managed to pull out those 2 cars from that 40-foot deep sinkhole, and now they're getting ready to cover it up before the next rainstorm arrives. DeMarco, that one could bring as much as 5 inches of rain to some parts of California.
Another big step towards treating cancer, this time from researchers in Hamburg, Germany, who say magnetic micro machines may be able to treat cancer from within the human body in a way that will not harm healthy tissue like traditional radiation. Manila Chan has that story tonight.
It's estimated that over 1.5 million people will be diagnosed with some form of cancer each year here in the United States, and nearly a third of those people will die. In the U.S., just a few years ago, back in 2010, we spent nearly $125 billion in cancer care, and that's projected to climb all the way up to at least $156 billion by the year 2020. Much of that money still spent on traditional treatments such as chemotherapy or radiation, but now scientists in Germany have been working on a unique way to treat cancer and possibly a slew of other ailments with something they call magnetic swarms. Now, still in the very early stages of development, researchers at Philips would be able to place this nanotechnology into injectable pills. The pill would then open up inside the patient, and nano seeds would then travel to the site of the tumor, emitting radiation. Now, this would be a huge move for cancer treatment if this actually reaches development phases. This will allow doctors to target and treat specific affected areas rather than treating the whole body with radiation, which damages all the other healthy tissue. And according to Live Science, the scientists working on this development say that another potential use for this micro robot could be for medical implants that change over the course of time when patients begin to heal. So these tiny bots can basically reform to alter the shape of the implant to work with new tissue that's surrounding it. So imagine that, Ed. Just think about how many people this could someday help.
New evidence suggests city water in Flint, Michigan caused a bacterial outbreak that killed multiple people. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention found a genetic link between water samples taken from McLaren Flint Hospital and phlegm from 3 people diagnosed with Legionnaire's disease. Legionnaire's is a type of pneumonia people get from inhaling contaminated water droplets. More than 70 people in the Flint area have had the illness since the water crisis started in 2014. 12 have died. The state of Michigan argues the high number of Legionnaire's cases involving the hospital were due to failures in its private water system, not city water from the river. But one of the 3 people the CDC sampled didn't receive treatment at the hospital. If bacteria found at the hospital matches a patient who didn't receive services, it's possible that both cases came from somewhere else, like Flint River water. The discovery marks another public health concern for a city plagued with water problems. In 2015, Flint declared a state of emergency after discovering that aging pipes filled the river with lead. Officials haven't been able to identify where that third person was exposed to Legionnaire's. A state official told Michigan Live the case still needs a lot of, quote, sleuthing.
An antibiotic-resistant superbug will be launched on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket Saturday from the same Cape Canaveral pad where the first manned mission to the moon lifted off. The superbug will be studied by astronauts on the International Space Station. Working in conjunction with NASA, lead researcher Dr. Anita Goel hopes that by sending MRSA bacteria to a zero-gravity environment, we can better understand how superbugs mutate to become resistant to available antibiotics.
Out of the Canadian border and the uptick in immigrants fleeing north to find a new life. Customs officials say families, some undocumented, have been sneaking across for decades, but now with heightened fears around the president's new policies, those numbers are spiking. ABC's Eva Pilgrim right there tonight with the latest.
Right now, immigrants in limbo desperately fleeing to the north. Families with small children making the trek on foot in the snow, dragging everything they own.
It's very painful.
Canadian Border Police making arrests, but assisting those who make a refugee claim.
We made it, and we're happy with that.
The number of asylum seekers illegally crossing along the Quebec border skyrocketing in January, up 230% over last year.
The system was made to handle about 15,000 claims a year. We're at 30,000 right now. Like I said, working double capacity. The system just wasn't made to handle that number of claimants.
Many making the move out of fear after recent immigration raids and continued debate over the president's executive order banning refugees from 7 majority Muslim countries.
These are campaign promises. Some people are so surprised that we're having strong borders. Well, that's what I've been talking about for a year and a half, strong borders.
Canada allowed nearly 40,000 Syrian refugees into their country in the past year. In a joint news conference with Trump, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the policy will remain.
We continue to pursue our policies of openness
towards immigration and refugees without compromising security.
So far this weekend, immigration lawyers telling us that there's been a steady stream of people crossing the border here illegally. They say it doesn't appear to be slowing down anytime soon.
Thousands of Mexicans linked arms to form a human wall along their country's border with the United States on Friday to protest Donald Trump's plan to build a massive border wall. The protest brought together politicians, social leaders, and crowds of students who hurled slogans at Trump's administration. Trump's promise to construct a massive wall on the U.S.-Mexico border has enraged many people in Mexico. A similar protest was planned on Mexico's Pacific coast at the border between the city of Tijuana and San Diego. Meanwhile, the White House denied reports that Washington was considering mobilizing as many as 100,000 National Guard troops to round up foreigners living illegally in the country.
Geert Wilders' comments about Moroccans led to a criminal conviction for inciting discrimination back in December. But in a marketplace outside of Rotterdam on Saturday, the firebrand politician launched his general election campaign with another extraordinary attack.
Look at the Islamization of our country. If a Dutch person driving in a car drives 5 miles too fast, he will be fined within a minute. Whereas the Moroccan scum in Holland, and once again, not all are scum, but there is a lot of Moroccan scum in Holland who makes the streets unsafe.
Wilders is leading the opinion polls ahead of the crucial elections on March the 15th. Elections seen as a litmus test of European politics after the Brexit referendum and Donald Trump's victory in the United States. Aggregate polls give Wilders and his PVV party as many as 28 seats in the 150-seat lower house of parliament. That's potentially 4 ahead of Prime Minister Mark Rutte's ruling VVD party. Wilders has promised to ban the Quran and close mosques if he wins power, and his views are attracting support.
He's going to help us take back the house keys to our own home, make us the boss of our own home again, of our own country.
But many Dutch voters still find Wilders' anti-immigrant rhetoric runs contrary to fundamental Dutch values.
Here we have a constitution and freedom of religion, and it is one of our most important rights here in the Netherlands, one for which we have fought, and we can never leave that behind.
I think Mr. Wilders dares to say what a whole bunch of Dutch people think, and that's good. But he doesn't do much. I think he talks a lot, provokes a lot of hatred, but doesn't do anything. He doesn't have a real solution.
It's an ideology. It's not a belief.
After Wilders left the election launch, fierce arguments broke out between his supporters and opponents.
The German Chancellor Angela Merkel says that the European Union has an obligation to accept refugees.
We have a responsibility. The European Union has a responsibility to bear. Accepting those refugees, fighting the root causes of flight. We as Germany have shouldered this responsibility together with a number of other European member states. Unfortunately, within the European Union, we have not found a common position on this issue.
Addressing the Munich Security Conference, Merkel one more time expressed support for asylum seekers and called on EU states to help the refugees coming to Europe. The German Chancellor, who is critical of a U.S. travel ban on Muslims and immigrants, noted that Islam is not the source of terrorism, but rather the problem lies within a false understanding of it. Merkel pointed out that the bloc is in a difficult condition due to Brexit. She urged European countries to stay unified and warned not to go it alone. Merkel added that the EU should also do more to preserve and strengthen its defense.
Germany wants to keep its promise to shell out more money for defense. The country is part of the NATO alliance. It's pledged twice, once in 2006 and once in 2014, to put 2% of its gross domestic product toward defense spending. But Germany hasn't met that goal. Now, Chancellor Angela Merkel says the country is ready to do more to get there. Merkel's promise comes days after U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis gave an ultimatum to U.S. allies in NATO. He told ally leaders if they don't meet defense spending expectations, the U.S. might, quote, moderate its relationship with the organization. U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly urged allies to increase defense spending.
We strongly support NATO. We only ask that all of the NATO members make their full and proper financial contributions to the NATO alliance.
Out of the 28 member nations, only the US, UK, Estonia, Poland, and Greece meet the defense spending target. Historically, Germany has hesitated to up its spending. The country forks up a little over 1% of its GDP. The US spends more than 3%. That hesitation is due in part to World War II. Some still don't want to focus too much on strengthening Germany's military. Still, Merkel said she's committed to upping the budget. It'll just take some time.
The U.S. Vice President has tried to appease his European allies with a stark criticism of Russia over the crisis in eastern Ukraine.
With regard to Ukraine, we must hold Russia accountable and demand that they honor the Minsk agreements, beginning by de-escalating the violence in eastern Ukraine. And know this, the United States will continue to hold Russia accountable. Last month, the President ordered the...
Mike Pence was delivering his first major foreign policy address for the new U.S. administration at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. He said that Washington would continue to hold Russia accountable if the spiral of violence in Ukraine continued. However, he added that President Trump is searching for new ways to cooperate with Moscow. Mike Pence also assured the U.S. commitment to the European Union and the Western military alliance NATO. Europeans remain skeptical about Trump's foreign policies, especially with regard to Russia. Pence has scheduled meetings with the leaders of several Baltic states and the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko to discuss regional issues.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov presented Russia's views on NATO and the U.S. during his keynote speech at the Munich Security Conference. Lavrov said Russia wants to build pragmatic relations with the United States based on mutual respect and denied allegations that Russia tries to influence other nations' elections. The Russian top diplomat also described NATO as a Cold War institution whose expansion has raised tensions in Europe over the past 30 years.
Residents in troubled East Ukraine now have easier access to travel or work in Russia. President Putin signed a temporary decree to recognize the IDs and registration documents issued to people in the regions of Lugansk and Donetsk, from where Murad Gazliev now reports.
Well, it's a presidential decree where he orders the government to start accepting Donetsk People's Republic, Lugansk People's Republic passports, documents, various documents issued here in the two self-proclaimed republics that the Ukrainian government refuses to issue. We're talking here about birth certificates. For years now, people, Ukrainian citizens born here in Donetsk, in Lugansk, in the two besieged regions, have been unrecognized by the Ukrainian government. We're talking about death certificates, even school graduation certificates. So somebody finishes school, their diploma isn't recognized by their own government, and that has made life very difficult. People here essentially in legal limbo. They can't leave the country because their documents have either expired and they can't get new ones. The only way to get new ones is to cross the front lines, go to Ukraine government-controlled territory and hope that bureaucrats there will meet them halfway, will help them. The Russian foreign minister was in fact asked about this presidential decree at the Munich press security conference.
This decree will serve the humanitarian needs of the people of Donbass, as they are currently under various restrictions. They can't collect pensions, welfare, and don't have access to medical services. They can't travel freely, considering many people have family members who live in Ukraine or Russia. This decree will take effect until the Minsk agreement is fully implemented. It will allow those with IDs issued in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions to enter Russia and travel freely within the country.
Essentially, anything that requires a document was restricted here in eastern Ukraine for years now. You couldn't get married legally, you couldn't divorce, you couldn't, for example, sell a car or buy a house. None of these things were possible from a legal standpoint. The Ukrainian president has nevertheless already come out and said that this is another attack on Ukrainian sovereignty by Russia. More evidence of the occupation here. There was also a rally today in Donetsk. More than 20,000 people in the street, in the square just behind me, calling on the Ukrainian government to fulfill its obligations under the Minsk peace plan. And on that note, the two sides, the anti-government fighters and the Ukrainian government, on the 20th of February, they're again going to withdraw heavy weapons away from the front lines, something that they've done numerous times before, but those heavy weapons keep on coming back.
Now, in a potentially huge blow to North Korea, China has announced that it's going to suspend all imports of coal from North Korea starting from Sunday. Beijing's Commerce Ministry said Saturday that the import ban is part of its efforts to implement UN sanctions against Pyongyang for its nuclear missile provocations. The ministry added that the ban will stay in effect until the end of the year. The move comes just 24 hours after US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson asked his Chinese counterpart during talks in Germany to do more to pressure North Korea to refrain from provocations. China imported more than 22 million tons of coal from North Korea last year, and exports of the mineral are a mainstay of the North's fragile economy. It's widely believed the funds are used to support its weapons development.
A Chinese Navy training formation comprising 3 warships, including a guided missile destroyer, has wrapped up a week of training in the South China Sea. Exercises included sudden attack drills and were carried out successfully in poor sea conditions. The fleet will now sail towards the eastern Indian Ocean.
Iran's Islamic Revolution Guard Corps is set to launch a fresh round of military drills in an effort to boost the capabilities of its forces.
We're going to have the military drills codenamed the Great Prophet 11 in central and southeastern Iran. The exercises are slated to be conducted from February 20th to 22nd.
Pakpur said rockets and long-range artillery will be tested on the first day of the drills. According to the Iranian commander, the troops will hone their civil defense skills on the second day. The third day will engage in infantry units as well as special commandos. Elsewhere, in his remarks, Brigadier General Pakpur said Tehran has been sending military advisors to certain countries at those countries' request. He then warned U.S. officials over threatening to take military action against Iran. Pakpur said the White House is unlikely to wage in such a war, as it would be irrational to do so.
The U.S.-led military coalition said its forces struck a building in western Mosul that's suspected to house an Islamic State command center. The strike follows reports that militants are dug in among civilians on the western side of Mosul. They're supposedly storing weapons in hospitals, schools, mosques, and churches as a tactic to avoid targeting. The militants are basically under siege in western Mosul, along with an estimated 650,000 civilians. This follows U.S.-backed forces surrounding the city and dislodging them from the east in the first phase of an offensive that finished last month.
Zimbabwean banks only have enough cash in offshore accounts to finance about 2 weeks' worth of the country's imports. That's according to its central bank. Now, Zimbabwe introduced a bond note currency last year that is backed by a $200 million loan from the Africa Export and Import Bank. The notes are holding their value, but businesses do say they still face serious delays in paying for imports because banks have no dollars to make the payments. Zimbabwe needs an average $430 million a month to pay for imports. With only $250 million in offshore accounts, local banks can only finance imports for about 2 weeks. Now, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe said it would start a local visa settlement platform from the end of this month to help preserve its foreign exchange.
As part of Pope Francis's drive to clean up the finances of the Holy See, its chief magistrate said on Saturday that Vatican authorities froze more than €2 million in cases of suspected money laundering in 2016. The Vatican promoter of justice made the disclosure during his annual address on the state of the Vatican's criminal justice system. Milano added that the total amount of suspect money frozen between 2013 and 2016 was about €13 million. The money was frozen following alerts from the Vatican Financial Intelligence Authority. The authority has given Pope Francis more operative power.